Good morning. Thank you for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you this morning, and I especially appreciate the shared ministry here at UU, where so many different people and groups come together to make this a vital and welcoming place for everybody. Next month will be 2 years since my husband Rob and I moved to Whidbey from Oakland, California. I'd lived in the Bay Area for 40 years, so it was a big change for us, as you can imagine, and it was one we were both ready for. Shortly after we settled in, I sought out UU. My background and training is as a Zen Buddhist practitioner, but I knew that UU would be a welcoming place, as well as a place I could learn about local social and racial justice issues. And I'm happy to say I was right on both counts. In the Zen Buddhist tradition, practitioners new to a particular sangha or community give what's called a way-seeking mind talk. And in these talks, they reflect on and share their practice with the rest of the community. I'm not brand new here, but I do feel relatively new compared to those of you who have been coming 15 plus years. So I see this talk today as my own way-seeking mind talk. And I recognize that people of all faiths and no faith come to UU. So I invite you to bring your own experience to this talk, and I also welcome the chance to hear any points of connection or difference afterwards in terms of our own journey. The poet Mary Oliver once said, "There's only one question: how to love this world." There are other questions that matter, of course, such as, why are we here? Or, what happens to us after we die? When will there be a vaccine for this virus that's killing so many of us? Yet I find the question, how am I to love this world, to be supremely useful? It's a question that I use as both ballast and sail on my journey whenever I find myself on uncharted waters. When I'm not sure what to do, this question provides me with a clear intention of how to live my life. So when I first read Oliver's statement many years ago, I was working long hours as an organizational psychologist in the Bay Area. And so my answer was fairly straightforward. I was loving the world by helping leaders of organizations bring out the best in themselves and others. I was sharing the skills and practices of collaborative leadership. And it felt like good work, important work, and it consumed me. Now it's 2020, and I find myself living in a nation that in many ways is unrecognizable to the one I grew up in. My siblings and I often say to each other, "Thank God Mother and Dad died when Obama was president." Unprecedented is now used so frequently by journalists, you wonder what can possibly top last week's news. Our country seems to be spiraling into ever-growing chaos and confusion. There are multiple converging crises. The extreme racial disparities exposed by the coronavirus, as well as by the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others, at the hands of police and white vigilantes, are causing many white people to finally wake up to the horrific systemic racism that underpins our society. As we shelter in place, even a place as beautiful as Whidbey, many of us are grieving losses of one kind or another. I hear from friends of mine who are counselors that many of their clients are experiencing PTSD, as in persistent traumatic stress disorder, which is showing up as feelings of overwhelm, anxiety, and loss of control. Given our current reality, how would I answer Oliver's challenge today? How do I choose to love the world at this point in my life? If I had to choose just one answer, I would say by deepening and expressing my faith. Now, you should know that I was raised in a family which didn't adhere to any faith. I don't remember us even talking about religion. And I went to church maybe all of 3 or 4 times before leaving home for college. So my response isn't something glib or automatic. I also recognize that many of the seemingly intractable problems in the world stem from religious conflicts. And to resolve these problems and alleviate the suffering in the world, we need concerted effort, not some platitudes to believe in. But notice, faith and belief are 2 different things. I choose to go with the original meaning of faith. In Pali, an ancient language of the Indian subcontinent, as well as in Latin and Hebrew, the word faith is a verb. It is something we do, not something we have or believe in. The English language would imply otherwise, as if it is some possession. But the Pali word for faith, saddha, literally means to place the heart upon. So the verb to have faith means to give yourself wholeheartedly to something or someone. And I find the fact that faith was originally a verb exhilarating. In contrast to belief, faith is not a definition of reality. It's not a received answer. It is a dynamic, open process, a process that encourages us to participate in and be transformed by the world in all its beauty and terror. As Alan Watts said, belief clings, faith lets go. But this giving ourselves wholeheartedly to something or someone means doing so even when, especially when, the outcome is uncertain. That is the very nature of having faith. And it can be hard to do. I tend to prefer some guarantee that my effort is going to pay off in some way, don't you? Otherwise, I'm less enthusiastic about investing time and energy. Yet certainty is the very opposite of faith. Certainty is like a closed fist. Faith is like an open hand. And it's a courageous heart, one that is unafraid to stay open, one that is not afraid to stay engaged in the world, come what may. Today our world seems to be at a tipping point. Are we in the midst of a massive collective awakening and transformation, what some have called the Great Turning, where we finally stop denying the truths of racism and the climate crisis, of voter suppression and police violence, and we start working to repair the harm we've caused? Or is our democracy on the brink of collapse while we continue to destroy more and more species and head toward extinction ourselves? Many scenarios are possible. For me, that's all the more reason to do the inner work of cultivating faith. This wholehearted showing up for our lives and each other moment by moment by moment, with clear eyes and open heart. My sense is that this kind of presence is one of the most important medicines we can offer ourselves and each other. And the good news is that there are many ways to cultivate this presence. As both a Zen practitioner and an interfaith minister, I've explored a variety of faith traditions, and I know that at their core, all the great wisdom traditions embody this active meaning of faith. Beyond the credos and the doctrines and dogma, every wisdom tradition teaches its adherents a set of practices to do, where they can directly experience spirit. Engaging in these practices wholeheartedly, we become intimate with spirit or source, beyond any conceptual understanding. With practice, we experience letting go into our boundless interconnectedness. And it's this we have faith in, this vast web of interbeing, this ground of belonging which supports us and encourages us to act despite our uncertainty and no clear path forward. There's a Zen koan that points to this uncertainty that I've found helpful at various points in my life. It goes something like this. In ancient China, there was an advanced Buddhist scholar named Dharma-I. He had distinguished himself in the imperial courts, so decided to go on pilgrimage to the monasteries in the hinterlands to bring the monks there up to date with the latest in Zen teachings and scholarship. At one such monastery, he watched the abbot engaging with some students and realized this abbot was no country bumpkin as he had assumed. When the abbot approached Dharma-Ai the next day and asked him, "Where are you going?" Dharma-Ai replied, "I'm resuming my pilgrimage." The abbot asked him, "What is the point? What is the purpose of pilgrimage?" Dharma-Ai paused for a moment and replied, "I don't know." The abbot said, "Not knowing is most intimate." It's said that these words, "not knowing is most intimate," were turning words for Dharma-Ai and led to his awakening. I find this koan particularly suited for many of us North Americans. Our culture regards not knowing as ignorance, as a negative state to be avoided at all costs. For most of our lives, we've been rewarded for knowing, for having answers, for fixing problems, for performing well. Here, the abbot implies that not knowing is a positive state. So how can that be? Imagine for a minute being lost in a dark hallway without any lights, not even a candle or your mobile phone. We must feel our way forward as if we are blind. We are forced to become intimate with the wall through our hands and through our bodies. Our mind and our conceptual understanding do us no good here. They will not get us to our destination. This feeling our way along the wall, the abbot is saying, is how we can practice with life as it emerges, with all its surprises, ambiguity, and uncertainty. Often when something unexpected happens, it's primarily frustrating or an inconvenience, like when our car breaks down or our boss suddenly dumps a project in our lap without any warning. Now, these events are unpleasant, but we deal with them relatively easily. But sometimes the unexpected is a much bigger disruption in our lives. Sometimes it's a crisis, like when a friend betrays us or our child is diagnosed with leukemia. When this happens, it can throw all our long-standing assumptions into question. We may recognize that a change in our assumptions is called for, but still find ourselves not knowing what to do. It is in this state of not knowing what to do that we can be fully present and trust the web of interbeing to hold us and reveal new possibilities. And it is in such a state that Buddhists say we come nearest or become most intimate with our true nature, one which is inherently free and compassionate. Dharma-Ai reached such a state when he admitted he didn't know why he was going on pilgrimage. With the abbot's words, he suddenly realized he wasn't imprisoned by not knowing. He was freed by not knowing. He was free to feel his way along the wall until he found his own authentic response. In the past 4 to 5 months, life has certainly provided me with a lot of opportunities to practice with not knowing, and I'm guessing the same is true for many of you. Some of you may have lost a job or a house, or have a friend or a family member who has. Many plans have gone by the wayside as we continue to stay at home. Our daily rhythms have been disrupted. We've had to feel our way along the wall. We don't know when the physical distancing restrictions will lift or what our world will look like when they do. The murder of George Floyd has given me my biggest opportunity to practice with not knowing is most intimate. Like many people around the world, I was and am sickened by his murder and by how he was killed. I found the centuries of brutality and oppression against African Americans flooding my body, my nervous system, my psyche like never before. And despite many years of racial equity work, I was unsure about the most helpful way to respond. I felt a great sense of urgency, a need to act. For several days, I completely neglected my sitting practice as I began a flurry of activity, writing letters, signing petitions, donating money, marching. With the UU Justice Awareness and Advocacy Group, I started researching what defunding and transforming the police might look like. Then, a friend of mine who's a person of color reminded me to sit with my feelings before jumping into action. She pointed out how acting too quickly can be a distraction and a way to circumvent uncomfortable feelings about an issue. And that white people in particular do this in relation to racism. Activity, even when well-intentioned, can keep us from touching our pain and the pain of people of color. People who have lived with violence and threats and fear their entire lives. I thanked my friend for her words and started sitting again, tuning into my whole body, my head, my heart, and my gut. I became aware of the ache in my heart and the growing fire in my belly. As I settled, I noticed there was still some confusion moving around inside me. There were so many different suggestions about what white people could do, should do to be more anti-racist. Educate ourselves about personal and collective racist history. Read this list of 10 books. Listen to these 5 podcasts. March and protest. Call for reparations. Don't read books. That's what white people always do instead of organizing for change. Don't jump into action without examining our own white body supremacy. I continued to explore this question of how to respond most effectively. While initially uncomfortable, this confusion has proved to be a great crucible and teacher. I'm still finding my way along the wall, finding my own authentic and appropriate way of participating meaningfully in the movement to end systemic racism and injustice. And that's okay. In fact, it's more than okay. This crucible has renewed my commitment to do both inner and outer work for the long haul. As a bird needs 2 wings to fly, we need to do both inner and outer work if we are to soar, if we are to create a more just and loving world. Part of my exploration involved participating in many online workshops with titles such as Healing Racism and Ending White Supremacy, some of which were taught by white teachers, some by teachers of color. One workshop impacted me a great deal. The white facilitators talked about how we as whites need to replace our old default behaviors and protective strategies that keep us comfortable and ignorant about the racist system that we participate in and benefit from. They read a long list of protective strategies and invited us to notice which one set up a ping or vibration in our bodies, a resonance, some recognition. A few of the strategies that they named were denial, avoidance, withdrawal, perfectionism, intellectualizing, rationalizing, numbing, urgency, and individualism and going it alone. Many of us in the workshop said, "Oh my God, I do all of those." But many also identified especially with the protective strategies of intellectualizing, rationalizing, and reaching for perfection. We saw how this tendency of ours to stay in our heads, even in response to suffering, is part of our need to know, to have the answers, to be right. As we dove deeper, we experienced this mindset as part of the conditioning we inherited from our white ancestors who colonized this country. The mindset that insists on being in charge and in control, even when it means destroying others. As workshop participants, we committed to the practice of noticing with curiosity and self-compassion when these protective strategies arise in our bodies. Because only then can we replace them with more open-hearted, heart-centered qualities of generosity and connection. It's only then that we can stay aligned with our commitment to be anti-racist. Otherwise, we'll revert to our old unconscious strategies that allow us to disengage, to get preoccupied with other things, and to perpetuate our white supremacy culture. This stumbling along and trying new ways of being so that others might walk more freely in the world is a spiritual practice for me. It's uncomfortable and confusing at times, but I know I certainly benefit from this greater sense of connection and joy. And if I were a person of color in this country, struggling to be seen in my full humanity as I am and not less than, I would pray my white allies would take this on as a practice. As Ruth King, an African-American author and meditation teacher says, racism is a disease of the heart, quote unquote. And our clever minds are not the tool needed to treat this disease. Our hearts are. In closing, it's the practices of the great wisdom traditions that I place my faith in. It's the practices, whether it's meditating, drumming to call in the animal spirit guides, singing hymns, performing ecstatic whirling dances, or engaging in contemplative prayer. It doesn't so much matter which practice we do as long as it's truly the practice of a wisdom tradition and we do it regularly. All these practices lead to the same place, to the luminous ground of our being, where we can come together and offer each other the simple yet daring contribution of our genuine presence and love. In doing these practices, we become like Kuan Yin, the bodhisattva of compassion. Kuan Yin is often depicted sitting in a position of what's called royal ease, resting one arm on her raised bent knee, relaxed, yet ready to leap into the action for the sake of all beings. That is the benefit of performing spiritual practice. Our hearts open, we hear the cries of the world, and are ready to respond. Our world desperately needs this. We don't need to be of one mind or one faith tradition, but let us practice being of one heart. Thank you for your kind attention.